Good afternoon. We're going to get the next panel started. My name is Russ Vogt. I'm one of the vice presidents at Heritage Action, and we're pumped to have you here for the next member panel. We have the privilege of having 4 congressmen here who are in their first years in office, and I think particularly given the back and forth that we've seen all day about what is achievable here in Washington, D.C., they are a perfect group of members to hear from. They have had to recently run for office, win, get elected, come to D.C., and face the real challenge of trying to channel all of the energy, momentum, passion from the grassroots that got them elected into what is achievable here in D.C. We talk about it in terms of what is the art of the possible, but who gets to define the art of the possible? Who gets to define what is achievable? We believe that the grassroots, the conservative movement, those who are both outside and inside the political arena have a voice in that. And it's not easy. And these members have had to come, and they've done a wonderful job of getting elected, having to create a staff out of nothing, get expertise in policy areas that they may not have focused on because that they were at the state level, try to figure out who they trust, how Congress works, and then somewhere along the line lead and join the fight. And that has to happen, and there's no amount of time in which they can take a break. And so all of these members we're very excited to have. And I think the last point I would say of why they're a great panel to have is because it's so fresh in their mind. They've been here a year, so no one can say that in any way they are these naive newcomers who don't know how the place works. Instead, they've been here, and yet they are still relatively close to their first election. And so they have a great perspective of what is achievable, what's broken with the system, what needs to be fixed, what still outrages them, what advice did they think was useful, and we'll get into all of that in some of the questions. Our format will be very similar to the last panel. We will go through each of the panelists. They'll give some comments. We will then have a 20-minute back and forth conversation and then get into audience questions. So let me go ahead and introduce our 4 congressmen. First off is Congressman Ken Buck from Colorado, Congressman John Ratcliffe from Texas, Congressman Jody Hice from Georgia, and Congressman Barry Loudermilk from Georgia as well. So if Congressman Buck, if you'd start us off, and we'll get started.
Could we do a little audience participation first? Could you ever just repeat after me? Go Broncos. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want you to notice just one thing. As we're facing you, notice who is the furthest to the right on this panel.
But not from your perspective.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've noticed 2 ways of governing in Congress, and they both stink. The first is the John Boehner, we have a crisis method of governing. Everything is a crisis. If you don't vote for this, we're going to shut down government. If you don't vote for this, the Transportation Highway Fund will go away. It just, everything is a crisis, and it's bad. And I take Paul Ryan at his word that he doesn't like it. We'll see if he can, in fact, do what he hopes to do, which is avoid the crisis. But everything had a deadline in our first year, and it was a terrible way of governing. The pressure was, you're not part of the team unless you vote this way in this crisis. And most of us, many of the freshmen, certainly the people up here, didn't vote for that team. The team we're on is Team America, not Team D.C., and so that's probably the reason why we got invited today. The second way of governing is slightly better than the first, but still really bad, and that's what a lot of us conservatives engaged in, and that is voting no on everything. We have voted no, at least I have voted no on the transportation bill, on the omnibus, on the dock fix, on and on. And I think it's fundamentally wrong to just give that appearance that we stand against things. Even if they're bad things, we stand against things. I think one thing that we have to do as conservatives this year in 2016 is project that positive conservative image. And I'll give one quick example. I am a big fan of Mike Lee's devolvement bill on transportation. In my home county, we have Interstate 25, and the truckers don't want to come through the mountains on Interstate 70, so they come up through Interstate 80 to Cheyenne, and then they come down I-25. Our county commissioners, because I-25 is now overcrowded, our county commissioners are building a parallel road to bring the truckers off of I-25 and into Denver. They are building that road for 30 cents on the dollar of what it takes to build the interstate highway. They don't have to use Davis-Bacon wage laws. They don't have environmental impact studies. The state of Colorado, using federal funds and federal requirements, has spent $22 million on an environmental impact study over 5 years and has not put a single inch of pavement on the road. The county commissioners, in less time, have built a road, and like I said, for 30 cents on the dollar. It makes no sense to continue doing what we're doing when we have great alternatives. And that's the kind of issue that I think we need to push and make sure the American people understand that the federal dollar can go further. And if we do that, I think we will set the issues for the presidential campaign and hopefully move this country forward.
Great. Congressman Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Russ. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and participate in this panel. I was told, you know, to talk about some of the lessons learned. And, you know, I think where I'd start is, you know, one of the reasons I ran for Congress, like many of you, we sit around our, you know, kitchen table at night and think, what are they thinking up in Congress? How did they come up with that decision? And one of the things when I was fortunate enough to get elected that I looked forward to was to be able to come home and tell my friends and constituents how decisions were made on the other side of the curtain up here. And one of the things that I discovered pretty quickly, one of the lessons that I learned up here in the first few months, is that there's more than one set of curtains. And with that, I mean, you'd think as an elected representative for nearly 700,000 people that I would understand the motivations and agenda behind legislative decisions and the calendar by which we follow. And I think my guess is that my colleagues up here would echo with me that that was a frustration for us early on. I will say that with the change in leadership, we've seen a more open process with respect to regular order and how we're approaching business and having input into the things that we're approaching here. So I think that's a positive. One of the other things I would say that I've learned, you know, Russ talked about at the onset of this that, you know, coming in as new members, we're sort of having to make all these decisions, and part of that is really having to command a breadth and depth of knowledge about all sorts of subjects that really don't dovetail into the backgrounds that we brought with us to Congress. But you're the representative for 700,000 people, and you have to have you're the one voice on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. But I was fortunate that I had some good advice, and I would pass along to anyone coming forward, and that's, you know, focus on what you do well, get better at it, and shut up about the rest. You know, there's a whole bunch of folks here in Washington that are real generalists, and they try and talk about every subject. Now, for me, you know, I'm a former United States attorney, a former terrorism prosecutor. You know, there are folks, terrorists in federal prison right now because I put them there, arrested hundreds of illegal aliens in a single day. And that's one of the reasons that I went to Homeland Security and to the judiciary as the committee, so that I could, you know, contribute on subjects that I had familiarity with the content of the subject matter, and contribute to, you know, the important things. And, you know, for me, that fortunately dovetails with the primary role of our federal government. And the reason we have a federal government is to provide for the common defense. That's the primary reason that we have a federal government. And so, you know, I've enjoyed that opportunity to lead on national security issues. And I think that that's, like I said, I was the beneficiary of good advice coming up here in taking that approach. And I would like to see more members of Congress focus on that, and that way, when we talk about conservative voices and the movement of conservatism, we'd be better served if we had the right people talking about the right things.
Great. Congressman Hice.
Thank you, Russ, and thanks Heritage Action for holding this and for allowing us to be a part of it, and to each of you for being here on such a miserable day. I'm one of the few who got here without an umbrella, so I'm actually glad to be drying out a little bit right now. But also a huge thanks, obviously, to the 10th District of Georgia, which to me unquestionably is the greatest district in America, and I'm totally unbiased in that statement. But listen, my background is in a pastor and a conservative radio talk show, and people ask me frequently, what in the world's a pastor doing getting in politics, and what do you know about politics? And yeah, immediately I say, you obviously have never been a part of a Baptist church to ask that question. I felt like I was up for re-election every week. But you know, I've never held elected office before until this, and so the learning curve, as you can well imagine, has been huge. One concept I think that continues to come back to me personally is something my parents taught me, something that Scripture teaches us, and that is to be a servant. And it has been an incredible opportunity to learn at a whole new level what it means to be a servant. I'm very proud of our staff, the opportunity to serve the 10th District of Georgia and the constituents, and hearing so many multiple problems that people are having with our federal government. Can you imagine? But people are having trouble. And to be able to step in the gap and help has been an enormous thing on that perspective. But I'm very pleased to be on a couple of committees that serve me well and that I'm able to serve well, one of which is oversight and government reform. And one of the things, of course, the responsibilities there is to deal with the three branches of government, which I heard someone say, which is waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's what we deal with in oversight. And I'm pleased, you know, the media doesn't report this, but we have had this past year at least 10 of different heads of agencies and departments removed from office or reassigned or retired because of the work of oversight. And that has been a huge statement for me of, you know, we're making progress little by little. But we've got a lot to do, as you well know. We are in the fight of our life for this country. We're in the fight of our life. And to be able to be in the trenches in the midst of that is a huge honor. I'm looking forward to the year ahead of us. As has already been mentioned, the change of leadership has been huge. I have hope that we will be able to move forward through regular order and allowing rank and file members to represent their districts and step up to the plate and help turn the needle and help turn this thing around. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that. It was a great honor to be here, and thank you again for being here.
Great. Congressman Loudermilk.
Well, thank you. And I sat here a year ago as a newly sworn-in member or sworn-at member of Congress. I think they came in simultaneously. I didn't realize how quickly you grew horns as soon as you took the oath of office here. But as I sat here, one of the things I stated is in the conservative movement, which I've been involved in long before there was a Tea Party, traveled the nation teaching the ideas of our founding fathers, their principles, the biblical foundation of this nation. But I noticed something in our conservative movement that we had transitioned. And last year I said we need to transition that movement so that we're not known for what we're against, but we're known for what we're for. And we are moving into a new era of politics to where that is becoming more and more relevant. We're preaching to the crowd in here. We all fundamentally agree on conservative issues, conservative policies, and where we're going. But the reality is not the rest of the nation isn't quite there with us. You have a nation that elected Barack Obama as president twice. Someone who said in his campaign that he was going to fundamentally change our form of government, which is what he has been doing. Now, part of our role is to convince the other people out there why conservative values matter, why conservative values work, and how our founding fathers, while they didn't get it perfect, they got it right. Their ideas of limited government were right. There aren't too many out there that if you actually sit down with them one-on-one in a room and you lay out some ideas, some core principles about how the government has impacted their lives, that you can't convince someone that the government is generally the problem that we're facing. Now, this year has been the longest year and the shortest year of my life. I even served for 9 years in the state legislature. But things are a lot different here. The issues that we face are different here. But yet, the fundamental ideas are the same: freedom and liberty and the idea of limited government. And so as we're pushing forward, I think what we have to do is we have to, first of all, have a vision of where we're going. Without a vision, the people perish. But a vision is what we lack, not only in this nation, but in our own movement. If we can go out and we can explain to people what our vision of America is, I believe you get buy-in. You get buy-in from the right, you get buy-in from the center, and even from some on the left, because as they buy into it, they start moving from the left to the right because they realize that what we're about is freedom. We're about liberty. We're about getting the governments out of the pocket and out of the back of the American people. When you look at the growth of government, it's totally contrary to what the Founding Fathers intended with a limited government. And as we look at it here, we're fighting something of executive overreach. Well, part of the problem of executive overreach has been legislative underreach, because Congress has not effectively used the power of the Constitution under Article 1, which, in my opinion, they were never designed to be three separate but equal branches. They're separate and unequal branches, because when you read the Constitution, Congress has been given the lion's share of the power. Why? Because we're the most accountable to the people, and we directly represent the people. And so as we're moving forward, we have to also do what every American general since George Washington did as he went into battle, because as Jody said, we're in a fight for our life. We're in the fight for the heritage of this nation. The future, I have a 1.5-year-old granddaughter and another one on the way next month. They deserve better. They deserve much better than what we're passing on to them. So when we start moving ahead, we have to assess the battlefield. We have to know what our strategy is going to be going forward, but we have to know what the objective is. I was speaking to a bipartisan group recently, several different bipartisan groups, and I started talking about vision. So the problem that we have in America is the first thing we do is we argue over which road we're going to take before we've even decided what our destination is. So as I was talking about having a clear vision of where we're going in this nation, someone obviously from a different cut of political cloth than we are in here said, how could you get Democrats and Republicans and independents to agree on anything? So I asked him, I said, how many of you in this room think it's a good idea that we have an $18 trillion debt and growing? Nobody raised their hand. I said, well, we agreed on that. How many of you think it would be a good idea that we set a goal that within 15 years we seriously address this debt and begin paying it off? Every one of them raised their hand. I said, there's two things we agree on. How many of you think it's a good idea that Congress continue to spend more money than it brings in? None of them raised their hand. How many of you think that we should have a balanced budget in Congress and work toward that by the year 2030? And all of them raised their hand. I said, there's 4 issues we agreed on. But immediately somebody raised their hand and said, yeah, but when it comes to a balanced budget, you want to cut taxes and we need to raise them. I said, see, you're already arguing about tactics before we even started talking about a strategy. We have to paint a vision, as Reagan said, of a shining city on a hill, what it would be like to live in America that was like the one that our founding fathers envisioned. That's the takeaway I've taken from this year. You know, when Abraham Lincoln established the Department of Agriculture, there was one bureaucrat for every 225,000 farmers. Today, there's one bureaucrat for every 8. That's the growth in the size of government. The first thing that we have to address going forward, besides establishing a vision, is assess the battlefield, know what we have to do, and know what our enemy is. Our enemy has been the process and the system that has not favored individual members like those that you see here. We've begun to change that. We have a new leadership, one that is agreeing that we should empower every member of Congress. Every member of Congress should have the authority to represent the will and the interest of the people of their districts, not just take their orders from above. We're beginning to move in that direction. But we also have to have the understanding that the battlefield doesn't favor us right now because we have no power, we have no authority. Because we've abdicated our our Article I constitutional authority. This morning, Representative Ratcliffe and I joined with Senator Mike Lee in announcing the Article I project, a group of constitutionally minded representatives who through this year are going to be laying out a legislative agenda to restore those Article I powers to actually rein in the growth of government. So with that, I guess we'll move on.
Yeah.
They just called votes.
You're gonna have
Did
to
they?
leave, okay, well, we
Oh,
have,
right.
a quick end of the panel. So we're gonna take a break, Sandra, and appreciate all the congressmen coming